Hello guys, I certainly missed being in class today, and I was really looking forward to hearing everyone's initial reactions to the novel. I have gotten emails from several of you with things that you're interested in, so thank you so much for doing that. And if you still want me to send me a list of things that you're interested in, please feel free to do so. I'll make the open mic tomorrow. It's also been fun in those emails because you all have indicated sort of your reactions to the novel, so I've gotten a little taste of that. I'm going to make 2 videos, I think, maybe 3 if this gets really long, but I don't think it will be too long. This first one is going to be just kind of mentioning some sort of historical context things and other little tidbits of information that might be helpful. I typically don't really format this in lecture style for a grad class. They're just comments that I would kind of say along the way. So it's going to sound a little bit disorganized. Because it's not really meant to just be said straight like a lecture. But anyways, and then I'll make a second video where I will just maybe point to a few passages, things that I found interesting, maybe almost like what you guys will be doing next week with the presentations, kind of some of my little just thoughts on the novel, things that I might have shared in class. But that will be a separate video so that this doesn't get too long. So first of all, about Mary Augusta Ward herself, I don't have too much to say about her biography because I want to spend a little bit more time talking about sort of faith and religion and the backdrop of that. But it is probably worth noting that her father is Thomas Arnold, who you might not know, but Thomas Arnold's brother is Matthew Arnold, who, if you've taken courses before in Victorian studies, you might be familiar with him. Dover Beach is one of his maybe more famous poems. And I just thought it was also interesting to know that Mary Ward's own father, Thomas, kept kind of flip-flopping back and forth between being Anglican and Catholic, and that apparently this eventually destroyed his marriage. So she kind of witnessed firsthand some of what she's writing her novel about. She also first wrote a pamphlet on this subject of kind of loss of faith. And so again, I think in terms of genre, it's interesting to think that she was writing about this issue in other forms and then decided to try the novel. There's a little bit more information about her in the introduction, but you could also look her up in the Oxford National Biography Dictionary, Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, something like that. Our library has a subscription to it. It's a really great place to go just to get kind of a good, thorough but brief biography of someone. Bernstein also makes, I thought, what were 2 interesting points in the introduction, which if you order the class text, you can see that. One was that Bernstein feels that Ward's ideas about religion are fairly progressive, and oddly, Bernstein finds that her ideas about gender are not. So I thought that would be something for you guys to think about. And then another comment that Bernstein made that kind of stuck out to me because I thought it kind of helped structure an otherwise very wieldy long novel, but that she felt that you could trace Robert's spiritual journey in terms of his encounters with 3 people. You could probably guess what those 3 people are. Well, you will once you read a little bit further. Langham, Squire Wendover, and Catherine. So anyways, again, food for thought. That's from the introduction. So just in case you didn't have the same text, I wanted you to be aware of some of those comments. Okay, so I'm going to say just a little bit about kind of what was happening with religion in the 19th century, and some of you may know even more. I know Ryan has taken some classes with Josh and has done some work in this area, so he may have some wisdom to pass on next week as well. I haven't done a ton of work actually in religion in the 19th century. I've learned a lot more about it since I've come to Baylor and some things that I've done with Josh. But I'm still a work in progress when it comes to understanding religion in the Victorian period. And partly that's because it is so complex. So anyways, take all that to know that I'm really kind of scratching the surface here with you guys. So some of the, well, let me just say this. We tend to think about the Victorians and the Victorian age as this period of great doubt. And I'm afraid that the novel that I've assigned to you affirms that. And I think I just want to kind of hedge that a little bit by saying there's a lot of scholarship now, and I'll talk more about this later, that's kind of pushing back against that to say, well, sure, it was an age of great doubt, but it was also an age of great belief. And there's actually this really great Charles Dickens quotation from A Tale of Two Cities, in which he says, "It was the epic of belief, it was the epic of incredulity. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us." And the reason why I like that is because I think it does capture the fact that the Victorians were both a people of great belief and a people of great doubt. So I just don't want you to have the sense that every single person in the 19th century was losing their faith. A lot of the great writers that we tend to read, like George Eliot and the Brontes, some of the Brontes, Charlotte in particular, kind of went through some crises of faith, and a lot of other ones, even Dickens himself. So that tends to give us the sense that in this period, nobody was a believer anymore, which is not true. But some of the ideas that were most questioned during this time, we might say sort of newly or more vigorously questioned during the 19th century, was this idea of the authority of the Bible. Such things like, are miracles true, which you'll see Robert grapple with. Sort of this question over who was supposed to have control over the interpretation of the scriptures, the divine authority of the Bible. And I highlight those questions because I think they are some of the bigger ones in the 19th century, but also they're the ones that we see Robert grappling with, or really Catherine's refusal to join Robert in his new spiritual journey, what she's grappling with, which we'll get to later. Sorry, I might do a few spoiler alerts here. In 1851, there was a census where it's kind of now become a famous census where it sort of revealed that not as many English were part of the Anglican Church or considered themselves part of the Church of England, and that many more people were now attending these kind of dissenting groups, such as the Unitarians, the Methodists, or even evangelicals. There's also a thing with evangelicals, big E and little e. Ryan might actually be able to talk more about that. That's sort of what I mean by the complicatedness of 19th century religion, so that you've got sort of the big E evangelical group that would sort of call themselves evangelicals, and then the sort of little e and evangelical impulse that you might see in several different groups. Just to give you an idea of why we might have this sort of sense of great faith, and then also the sense of faith being attacked. The Nemesis of Faith, which is the title of a book, which was written by Anthony Freud. I have not read it, but it kind of makes me want to read it, knowing that it was burned as heretical at Oxford University in 1849, and it cost Freud his job, his fellowship there, and his father disowned him. One of the big questions that the book kind of asks is, why is it thought so very wicked to be an unbeliever? And this kind of question in 1849 sort of shocked people. Of course, we'll see as the century goes on that this question becomes more accepted. The idea of doubt becomes more accepted. But there was definitely this sense by strong, ardent Christians that their religion was being attacked. And some of that was coming from a lot of the scientific discoveries. Of course, we have Darwin, but there was lots of things happening in botany, biology, and geology, which were all kind of, again, back to the idea of the Bible as the divine source text for all of Christianity, kind of calling into question how we read and interpret the Bible. Sorry for all my coughing. I still have that awesome cold. In terms of more specifically miracles being under attack, Hume wrote this essay called, Essay Upon Miracles was the title of it, and it's in his longer work, Essays Concerning Human Understanding. And that it was in 1748, and for some reason that just really caught fire. in terms of some people who wanted to be skeptics kind of latching onto that, and then people who were wanting to defend kind of the divine authority of Bible, everything that happened in the Bible is literally true, now feeling attacked by Hume. And then T.H. Huxley, he wrote a study of Hume in 1879, so a little more than a century later, and he devoted a whole chapter to this question of miracles. So again, just to show you that it was kind of one of those reoccurring questions. Huxley, by the way, was called Darwin's bulldog. So he was a really outspoken supporter of Darwin and his scientific theories. Although he wrote a fairly sympathetic study of Hume, so he wasn't completely undermining everything Hume said, but his chapter on miracles apparently was interesting. And then Gladstone, who wrote one of the most famous reviews of Robert Elsmere, and I think you'll hear more about that from the groups presenting next week. He also wrote a defense of Scripture, basically, in a religious magazine called Good Words, and the essay was called "The Impregnable Rock of Holy Scripture," and that kind of turned out to be a catchphrase. He wrote that in 1890, so kind of towards the end of the period. But again, the same person who reviewed Elsmere and had various things, both positive and negative, to say about it. That sense, again, that we had to defend Christianity, but really the Bible as sort of this literal source of truth. While many felt under attack and had to sort of respond, right, with sort of a very heavy-handed, it is the Bible as literal truth and only that, there were, of course, other shades of responses. So Christian Socialists, which is another one of the many different groups, religious groups in the time period. Charles Kingsley is maybe one of the more famous ones that you might know because he also wrote fiction. But F.D. Maurice was also part of it. They had a little bit more of tolerance for what we might call a more liberal view of religion. I hate to say that because I'm trying to stay away from liberal and conservative in terms of political terms, but and they tended to focus more on the problem with the church as an institution. You also will see writers like George Eliot and, in our case, Mary Ward, kind of pick up on this too. So they kind of joined the conversation, but rather than get caught up in the sort of theology of it, they aimed their critique more at the church itself and said, let's reform the church. So you do have some people addressing doubt in that way as well, less from theology and more from a pragmatic side of it. So I'm going to read two excerpts from two poems to give you an example of some other texts that grapple with doubt, which is what we see this long novel doing. And then I think I'll end the video and do another one that talks about genre. So this first, I'm going to read 3 stanzas from Thomas Hardy's poem called God's Funeral. These come right from the middle of the poem. How sweet it was in years far hide to start the wheels of day with trustful prayer, to lie down legally at the eventide and feel a blessed assurance he was there. And who or what shall fill his place? Whither will wanderers turn distracted eyes for some fixed star to stimulate their pace towards the goal of their enterprise? Some in the background then I saw, sweet women, youths, men, all incredulous, who chimed as one, "This figure is of straw, this requiem mockery, still he lives to us." I could not prop their faith, and yet many I had known. With all I sympathized, and though struck speechless, I did not forget that what was mourned for, I too once had prized. So again, sort of a narrative of a loss of faith. The his pronoun was referring to God. And then another 3 stanzas from another poem. This is by Anne Bronte. It's called The Doubter's Prayer. While faith is with me, I am blessed. It turns my darkest night to day. But while I clasp it to my breast, I often feel it slide away. Then, cold and dark, my spirit sinks to see my light of life depart, and every fiend of hell, methinks, enjoys the anguish of my heart. What shall I do if all my love, my hopes, my toil are cast away, and if there be no God above to hear and bless me when I pray? So you can go explore these poems more if you want to. Again, it was Anne Bronte, The Doubter's Prayer, and Thomas Hardy, God's Funeral. But they both encapsulate in a much more concise form than Mary Ward does the sense of losing one's faith and what a tragedy that could feel like. And then how do you move through that? Okay, that's it for this one on the religious background of the 19th century.